All right, welcome everybody to Unraveling the Unexplained. My name is Kat, and I'm a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. I've been wandering around on the other side, interacting with all kinds of non-corporeal entities for more than 30 years. And the only thing that I've been interacting with longer than non-corporeal entities is this guy right here, my brother. This is John.
Hello, folks.
He has looked into a case study of the creepy and the paranormal. He's going to share some details about that with me, and we're going to chat about what is actually going on with some of this stuff.
So, we have talked in the past about, like, poltergeists and stuff.
We have, yeah.
Ghosts. This is an unusual one.
Okay.
This is the case of the Dalby Spook, otherwise known as Jeff the Talking Mongoose. Now,
I like it.
yes.
I like it. You know what? I like talking animals. I like spirit animals. I'm here for it. Is he a naughty goose?
Actually, indeed, he is actually specifically kind of naughty. So,
right.
This took place in the 1930s.
Okay.
On the Isle of Man. Now, I don't know if you know where that is, but the Isle of Man is in the Irish Sea between England and Ireland.
Okay.
And it took place on this farmhouse between the towns of Dalby and Glendale.
Okay.
And the farmhouse actually kind of had a bit of a history of weird haunting stuff before the main events started occurring. Like, the area has always kind of had a bit of a lot of legends and tales of weird stuff going on.
Ireland, right? Ireland's got a lot of legends.
People seeing
and things.
weird creatures and the like. But this particular set of events kicked off when a family, James and Margaret Irving, bought the farmhouse, and they had a daughter, like a young daughter named Voiry. She was, I think, about 13 when this stuff started kicking off. Now, before they even moved into the house, like when they were having it renovated, because this was an old farmhouse, like super old. We're talking like dated back at least several hundred years. There were some people who thought that this old farmhouse even was back to medieval times. Initially, when they were doing renovations, they'd hired a couple of guys to do some work at the house before they could move in. And these two guys apparently, like, the day after they started working, immediately kind of quit their job, saying that they were hearing weird sounds around the house. But the activity that led to this particular incident started in September in 1931, where basically James and Margaret started hearing like weird scratchings in the walls, weird kind of, little noises of what would sound like a small animal scurrying around. And like James was trying to figure out where it was, so he went up and like rolling around noises and found like this wooden idol of like an old Indian wooden idol he'd carved, like laying on the floor, and like he put it back and then went back downstairs and then heard it clatter down again.
Okay, so but it was his.
Yeah, from what I understand, it was his thing. And then, but it kept happening, and it wasn't too long before whatever was in the walls started like making weird barking noises, hissing noises, growling noises, like an animal you got scurrying around in your wall. They had that wooden secondary wall that he'd built in order to insulate the house because of the stone wall. And there was like a good like foot of space between there.
Why is that? That by in and of itself creeps me out. The notion of having like this foot of empty space in between your walls. Like I think I've watched too many things where
It's like
I don't want no space in between my walls.
It's the ideal spot for something to start living.
It's the ideal spot for something to go wrong.
To be fair, I'm not an architect. I don't know how common it is for there to be spaces in your walls or how big they are, but these ones were
That was the dog at the door and not something in between the walls. Our dog just started, that spooked me. Our dog just started scraping at the door to try to get into the studio.
Yeah. But no, in this particular case, there was like a solid foot of space back there.
I think usually it's filled with insulation.
Yeah.
Like there's space, but it's not
in this
empty
case,
space.
yeah, no, it was empty space. Basically, they started hearing all this growling and hissing, even like according to them, even occasionally the sound of like a baby crying. What happens is that James, for whatever reason, decided to start trying to growl back and like repeat the hissing sounds. And then when he did that, he would say, like, if he growled like a dog, he would then say the word dog. If he hissed like a cat, he would then say the word cat. And eventually the voice started, like the growling thing started repeating the actual words he was saying.
So he was teaching this entity how to communicate?
Gradually over the course of time, they basically got this, whatever it was in their walls, to start actually speaking coherent sentences and talking more and more. It became intelligible. If always described as having a really high-pitched, squeaky voice. And even as they were trying to attempt to communicate with it, its activity would increase and become more kind of harassing. Like it would spit at them, apparently, from the walls. They would find puddles of urine going around. And it would even start, like, harassing James in particular, like mocking him and bugging him as he was trying to sleep. So the voice got more coherent, but was also kind of a jerk.
I see.
And apparently, they also occasionally started catching sight of it. I believe his wife Margaret described briefly seeing the creature scurrying around, describing it as kind of like this short, fuzzy, kind of yellow-furred creature. Voyery saw it once, catching sight of it, saying it looked kind of like this 9-inch long, fuzzy weasel-looking thing. And apparently, it initially kind of identified itself as a weasel and named itself Jack.
Creepy.
This was like the case for a little while, and James went to his neighbors asking for like rat traps. And when inquired as to why he needed rat traps, he told his neighbor, "Hey, I just got into this bit of a weasel problem."
So he was trying to use literal traps on a spirit weasel.
Yeah, he was trying to get rid of this thing because the weasel, who at the time had named himself Jack, was claiming that he was a ghost weasel. And he was even described once as calling himself an earthbound spirit. This Jack Weasel was being pretty harassing towards everybody, especially apparently towards Voyery. He seemed to follow Voyery around a lot. The ghost, or what, Ghost Weasel, even described himself as a freak, saying he had hands and feet instead of normal paws, and that if anybody ever saw him, they would be petrified at his appearance.
Yeah.
So
this is sounding less like a weasel and more like trickster energy, but we'll get into trickster spirits and what they're up to.
So, like, James attempted to trap him, apparently attempted to poison him, like put rat poison in bread, and tried to get him that way. And they thought it worked because when that happened, that particular night, they heard like the voice screaming in pain for like 20 minutes, and they thought, oh, hey, maybe we got it. But then apparently Jack did the same thing and started screaming in pain for like 30 minutes the next day, but in a more mocking tone, apparently suggesting that he was just screwing with them. And like apparently this Ghost Weasel became increasingly aggressive, like sometimes throwing stuff, sometimes locking Voyery in a room, because apparently it locked from the outside but couldn't be locked from the inside, so she would sometimes just find her door locked. Like, people from the town were starting to, like, hear the rumors of what was going on, because James would talk about it, and sometimes people would come up trying to catch a glimpse of things.
And can you imagine that pub conversation? Like, hey, there's a weird yellow spirit weasel pissing on my floor, shouting insults at me and locking my daughter in her room.
I can't get rid of it. I've tried trapping, I've tried rat poison, nothing works. Do any of you locals happen to know a way to deal with ghost weasels?
Yeah, I can't imagine that pub conversation, although I don't know.
I don't know, James apparently had to start putting up signs around the farmhouse of like, keep out, don't bother us about the ghost weasel. If you're here for official visiting, fine, but like he had like keep out signs. As rumors of this spread, it of course eventually reached, journalists in the press. During the interview with this initial journalist, I believe James claimed that he'd been talking with the ghost weasel quite a bit, and that the weasel had learned to speak in German, Spanish, Yiddish, and Hebrew. James was apparently a linguist, a real language enthusiast.
So he's over here being Dr. Doolittle with the evil weasel spirit. What is this guy up? What is he doing?
That is an excellent question, because James seems to have a very antagonistic relationship with this ghost weasel initially, but it also seems like y'all just spend a lot of time talking to him. Now, this journalist claims that he did hear the ghost weasel talking, like that he would hear him speaking above, like. And apparently the weasel had a tendency to be able to, like, hear things or see things that he couldn't see, because as the journalist was listening in on this conversation with Margaret and kind of whispering to James, he heard the weasel say that he knew the journalist was downstairs whispering to James. But it's also around this time that certain, skeptics started coming up with their own theories about what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently the current and very much a modern theory about this is that Voiri was a skilled ventriloquist. Um, because it was often common that not all of the family would be present when they heard the weasel speaking.
Uh-huh.
Voiri would often not be present, but Voiri also kind of was a very withdrawn girl. She was specifically stated to have not really had much of a social life around the town, so I don't know if this is just a case of townsfolk just kind of being superstitious or bullying to a degree, because it's also said that they kind of viewed both her and her mother as weird. Like, her mother Margaret was especially kind of considered witch-like.
Oh, so it's a blame the girls sort of thing. It
kind of has some of that feel to it.
Yeah, that's sadly all too common, as blame the women for being weird witches. They're plainly, I mean, and it's a 13-year-old girl learned to be a ventriloquist.
To be like a skilled ventriloquist.
I guess she could have been hiding in the walls, like talking through the walls, if she had a way to get in there or something.
We'll get to that, because the walls play into that theory, but we'll get to that when we get to it. For the moment, this is around the time that people around the town also started kind of occasionally spotting what they thought might be the weasel, although the description of him always changed. Some people saw him as an unusually large, weird-looking cat.
Mm-hmm.
The actual description always changed a little bit. It was also around this time that the name change happened. Apparently during one time when the family was together at dinner, the voice basically just sort of spoke up suddenly and said that he didn't like the name Jack anymore. That he kind of hated the name. So from now on, call me Jeff. And it's also at that point where not only did he change his name, but he started describing himself as a extra special mongoose.
This is really funny. It kind of reminds me of you. Because, okay, so the family's always called him Jack. That's the name in the family. But one day he just decided he wanted to be John. I mean, you are definitely an extra special mongoose.
Thank you. Well, it's like John is my given birth certificate.
What's wrong with Jack? Why is you guys not liking the name Jack?
I have nothing wrong with the family calling me Jack. Family can call me Jack.
Yeah. It's okay. I understand, but I don't know what the very special extra.
Yeah, there's no real explanation for why Jack the Weasel decided to change himself to Jeff the Mongoose, but apparently that's what happened.
He needed a rebrand.
It is also around this time that he started explaining more about himself, and he claimed that he was a mongoose born in India 80 years prior, and that he traveled to Egypt, then England, before arriving on the Isle of Man. So
as a mongoose or as a dead mongoose?
A ghost dead mongoose.
Okay, so
Jeff was not very much into explaining details, but
in fairness, it would be weird to be a mongoose born in Ireland. I'm not sure they have a ton of mongooses in Ireland.
I'm not actually. I do think that mongooses were brought to those islands. I don't know where mongooses originate from. I am not a mongoose.
All I know is when I was a kid, the whole story of Rikki Tikki Tavi, right, where the mongoose is fighting the snakes, and I thought didn't St. Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland?
Again, not an expert on mongooses. But he also softened up towards the family and became less harassing. Apparently, Jeff's explanation for why he was so hostile towards the family initially is that he didn't think they liked him. And so he was just kind of giving back that energy. But as sort of James talked to him more, and apparently Voiri talked to him more, he kind of softened up and became more attached to the family.
You see, and you and I have talked about this before on other episodes about the energy that you give into these situations is very much controlling the kind of experience that you're getting out of it, right? Yeah. Because for something on the other side, they're getting a much broader communication from you. Your whole energy field is viewable to, knows that the reporters are liars. You're communicating with your entire energy field on the other side, right? In a way that we're not used to interpreting here while we're physical. So if you are responding with fear, if you're responding with unease, all of that kind of stuff is kind of like slapping them in the face. It feels like a rejection.
Yeah.
Right.
And
So
I mean, you'd get that impression James was getting the rat traps and trying to poison them and stuff.
right. And honestly, that's because he started acting up. Their mongoose friend or whatever
Yeah.
started doing some not very pleasant things. But again, it's to their perspective, it's like you started it, you provoked it because you were scared, uncomfortable, don't like this. You know,
Yeah.
they can sense all of that. You're not hiding anything from a non-corporeal being. So
Yeah, but it also makes sense then that the energy would soften up, especially if James is taking the time to talk to him, teach him how to talk, teach him different languages. So that kind of makes sense, because apparently Jeff was very talkative now with both the mongoose and kind of just about the mongoose. This is around the time James was less about putting out sights to keep away and more just willing to talk with people in town about what was going on. Though Voiry and Margaret were specifically noted as being very quiet and reluctant to talk about any of it.
well, I would be too if I was being blamed for everything and
Yeah.
being called a witch. I can't say I blame them.
So this is also like there were more sightings and interactions between Jeff and the locals of the town.
Because
And
it's spreading the energy.
yeah. So there was a situation where two local boys, Will Cubbin and Harry Hall, came to the house and apparently saw like Jeff out in the like fields by the house, and also went into the house to kind of like talk to the family about him. And it was here that apparently that Jeff would like eventually start talking, try spitting at them from the ceiling and whatnot. And apparently Jeff was very much into kind of checking out the town, because it said that he would like talk to the Irving family about things that were happening in town, things Jeff would see, including apparently he was spying on some of the local bus drivers, talking about stuff they were doing. And one of the bus drivers really got angry about that. Apparently tried to catch Jeff multiple times, but never succeeded.
Yeah, because we're starting to get into the sphere of nosy.
Yeah.
Nosy Nunnia.
This is a very, like, if Jeff is a spirit,
Nosy
he
Nunnia.
is very active compared to at least, a lot that I've heard about. Because mostly when I hear poltergeists, they're just kind of stuck in that one spot, just kind of knocking over chairs or dishware. Jeff is getting out,
Their spirits are not necessarily trapped or contained in a location. That's sort of a myth. They're only trapped or contained or connected to a location if they think they are. Right? Because you're creating your own reality. So if they think that they're stuck in a house, then they're going to be stuck in a house. The minute they realize they're not actually stuck in the house, they're not.
Yeah, and it gets even spookier because apparently Jeff started to get kind of protective of Voiry, because Voiry was getting more and more flack as being weird, and some of the rumors that she was like responsible for this as a prank with her ventriloquism were spreading. And apparently there were some people that were like calling her the spook, like the Dalby Spook. That name kind of got attached to her. And apparently like one particular farmer who insulted her made Jeff angry, and Jeff threatened to do something to his livestock. And apparently all of that farmer's turkeys and ducks mysteriously vanished.
Jeff the Spook. Because isn't the guy's name Jeff too?
The Dalby Spook is a name that was attached to Jeff, and then it sort of got attached to Voiry as like a mocking thing.
Isn't the dad's name also Jeff?
No, the dad's name is James.
James. Too many J's. In Ireland, it was this Jack, James, Jeff. Pick a different letter. It's okay. Branch out, Ireland.
Actually, I'm not entirely sure the Irving family are themselves from Ireland. I think it was specifically noted they were kind of outsiders, which may have played into like the way the town was viewing them.
Back in the day, you could be an outsider if you were from 30 miles away in a different town, though. Like, people were a lot more cloistered then.
Yeah, true enough. It's also noted that the family would like set out food for Jeff. Like, apparently he had a spot, like this little ledge next to the stairs leading to the second floor, and they would leave food out for him, which he would apparently eat, which he was initially described as saying that he didn't need food, that he just sort of survived off of breathing the air, but when food started getting left out for him, he would still eat it. Apparently he was a fan of bacon.
Who's not a fan of bacon?
This is true.
Monsters.
But yeah, he also apparently could get sick. There were times where he would like catch a cold and cough a lot. It's the first time I've ever heard of a ghost that could get sick, but an interesting trait.
Well, thus far from what I've heard, that's because what you're dealing with is not actually a ghost.
Next big event on the timeline here is in February of 1932, where a very famous paranormal investigator named Harry Price got a letter about all of this. And while initially he was busy investigating something himself at the time, he sent an associate, a Harold Dennis, a former Red Cross ambulance driver and apparently also like part-time paranormal investigator and journalist and zoologist to a degree, like an interest in zoology.
Yeah.
So this Harold Dennis guy gets sent out initially to investigate and did 3 different trips out to investigate Jeff. Jeff has a negative reaction to him. A lot of shrill shouting and yelling and stuff like that. To the point where, like, Dennis claims he's hearing the voice, but it's so high-pitched and shrill he can barely understand what it's even saying.
Yeah.
And, like, the next day, Jeff even specifically states to the family that he's irritated and didn't want to bother with this guy. One particular incident that is noted here is that while he was having tea with the family, a needle apparently flew out of this little hole in the wall and, like, flew past his head. Dennis gradually became more and more of a believer the more he visited. Price had requested like some sort of physical proof or evidence, so the family apparently, after Price had left, it gave Jeff a pair of scissors, or like left a pair of scissors out on the ledge where Jeff was known to hang out, asking Jeff to get like have a fur sample. Which apparently Jeff gave them fur samples to send to Harry Price, who in turn had them these like fur samples investigated by a zoologist, like an animal expert, which according to them this was dog hair. Apparently the Irving family had a sheepdog named Mona, so you could look at that as, you know, maybe the family was trying to hoax things with dog hair, but the family just said it was Jeff playing a prank. They tried other forms of physical evidence because Harry Price had given them a camera to take pictures. If you ever look up Jeff the mongoose, you'll actually find a bunch of black and white photos of a really fuzzy looking thing on a fence. Price and, of course, most journalists did not find these photos very convincing because of how blurry they are, and like it could be like a fuzzy hat or scarf on a post. But another thing they did to try to provide physical evidence were these plaster casts of his paw prints, which Price also sent to, I believe, the Natural History Museum, but there was no like actual proper identification of these casts.
Yeah. I mean, we are dealing with the 1930s, so we're not sure how forensic this actually is.
These investigations kind of continued. Harry Price did visit more than once trying to get information on Jeff. He also apparently became very focused on voyeury. He noted the space between the walls and noticed through his own little experimentation that these walls were very good acoustic amplifiers. And if you spoke into a hole or some cubby in one part of the house, that voice would travel to practically any other part of the house. So he theorized it was entirely possible for if somebody was in a different room, they could make up a strange voice and that voice could be heard clearly, say down in the living room. He thought voyeury could be a responsible party, and it even invited her to London to do an interview. Price eventually published a book. There were some theories at the time that James was interested in making money off that book, like bugged Harry Price about any potential royalties from the book. But otherwise, it's noted that the family never really tried to make any money off of the situation. They didn't try to, pay for interviews or anything like that.
Yeah.
I think the most notable thing that could have potentially been anything money related would have been there was a time where voyeury had a thing for kind of hunting rabbits around the farm, and Jeff apparently helped her out with that. And these rabbits were described as not being killed normally, that it looked like they'd been strangled.
Yeah.
Which is weird.
It's I had already written this down a little while ago about this case, but it actually sounds to me like it's well, are you finished? We can talk about it.
We do got some more to go. Voyeury especially is known to have kind of soured on Jeff. Starting to like vocally dislike Jeff's presence, though never denying that he was real or existed. A Hungarian lawyer and paranormal investigator named Nandor Fodor.
Wow, that is a name. That is Middle Earth worthy, right?
Well, I mean, Tolkien probably
Nandor, say it again, Nandor Fodor.
Yeah, Nandor Fodor.
Nandor Fodor is definitely son of Gimli's son of Groin or something.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing with him and his investigation is that his conclusions were initially that he thought this might be Margaret, but not a hoax, but he thought Margaret might actually be psychic. There were rumors, of course, that Margaret kind of had a witchy-like feel to her by the townsfolk.
Yeah.
But apparently Fodor was thinking that she might legitimately just be some sort of psychic who was manifesting something. Years later, apparently, he made a statement that he'd changed his theory, specifically saying that, quoted to have saying that, at the time I was not adequately equipped with psychoanalytic knowledge to explore James' unconsciousness, and that if I had been, I would have been more confident that exploring James' dream life would have yielded more clues as to the true nature of Jeff.
Okay.
That it had something to do with James being kind of weirdly isolated and apparently wanting to manifest something.
I mean, that's kind of an interesting theory. I'm not sure what's happening in your unconscious that you're manifesting a yellow Indian mongoose that pisses on your floor.
But who knows? The mind is a strange thing. This is sort of where the story winds down, with Jeff having fewer and fewer manifestations. And it's particularly noted that there were times where Jeff would be heard to say that he was begging James to let him go. Voyery eventually moved out in 1940. And then in 1944, James falls ill. James died in August 1945, aged at 72. The Irvings eventually had to sell off the farm and couldn't get a good price for it because it had a bad reputation due to the haunting of Jeff the Talking Mongoose. A guy who bought the house later on, Leslie Graham, in 1947, who claimed that he shot Jeff, but Voyery specifically claimed when she heard the news that that wasn't Jeff. The farm was demolished in 1971. Voyery herself died in 2005, claiming, even till the day she died, that Jeff was real and not any kind of hoax. Apparently, she was on an interview in 1970 and talked a bit about Jeff, basically describing that she didn't really like Jeff and that this never really led to anything good in her life. Her claim was that if I was that good a ventriloquist, I would have made a career out of it.
Yeah, no kidding.
That is largely how the tale of Jeff the Talking Mongoose ends. But that's what I've got. A very unusual situation, to say the least.
Yeah. And it's interesting. So there's a couple of things that jumped out at me immediately about this. The first is the presence of a 13-year-old girl. Even if it was a boy, it's that kind of when puberty kicks in and there's a lot of emotional stuff going on, a lot of changes happening, that leaves energies. Energies are heightened and receptive, and they kind of create sort of a energy vortex or a tornado in the household. That's not uncommon at all. We've had other cases where there were early adolescents involved in these cases. And I myself, like, my abilities kicked in when I was 12, right? So it's the kind of thing that it opens up the capabilities for people who are going to have natural abilities.
If something's going to happen, that's when it starts happening.
Right. Especially around people who may have natural abilities. Maybe mom was a little psychic and maybe so was daughter, right? And nobody's really making the connection or the correlation. So it is possible that something got stirred up and pulled through, kind of left an open portal with this girl's energy field. It interests me. The initial incidents involve this being knocking over a carved idol. So it's not giving spirit mongoose of India, right? It's giving extra dimensional, or something that may even be an older sort of potentially deity spirit or fae in the area.
Yeah.
Right.
And especially because that particular area had all sorts of rumors and stories of weird
Right,
fae.
right. It's kind of a tip off to me when the first initial activity is knocking stuff, like an idol or a carved image of something of that nature off the shelf, right? It's trying to gain your attention along those lines. There's a couple of other pieces to it that kind of tip me off to it. All of the learning that's taking place, all of the language learning, and all of anything that is like learning from you is probably extra dimensional.
Because it needs to figure out how to interact with
Right,
humans.
right. So this is not the spirit of a dead anything from here.
Well, especially because, like, initially it was okay with being, like, Jack the Weasel. And then later on it's like, no, I'm Jeff the Mongoose, you know?
Right, it's probably neither. Right. A lot of the initial activity is all giving very much trickster energy, provoking a response. So we're trying to provoke more interaction out of you. We're trying to provoke more energy out of you. We're trying to actually, it's a method of strengthening themselves in their own presence in the physical environment to be provoking a reaction. It is possible that when we've got extra dimensional beings, I am not that familiar with beings of the Fey realm. I've had some interactions with things that I would consider probably in that regard, right? Or along those lines. It's a sort of 3D reality space, but less firmly condensed. Things like magic and manipulation is much easier in places where the energy levels are less dense.
Yeah.
So it's not as dense as here, but it is still physically manifest. It's an adjacent realm, right? And things that come from that realm, they've got a completely different idea about what's acceptable and what's not. They do have a greater use and capability with energy, manipulating energies and manipulating reality, things that we would consider magics here. So gaining a foothold in this more dense reality here means needing to increase their own energy levels or their own oomph, right? They're used to interacting in a space where things are less dense, so they will.
So you have to spend time gathering a bit of power and density.
It's kind of why Fey realms have this reputation of being full of like tricksters and people that are provoking you, or entities along that line. Is it's really in order for them to operate well here in this denser field. They need a little bit more oomph than they're used to actually having where they're from. So they oftentimes are provoking those kinds of responses out of people in order to kind of get an energy boost.
I gotcha.
In this case, I would say the daughter is actually the energy boost. For a teenage girl to be that kind of withdrawn and quiet is probably a lot going on the inside, emotional turmoil. In a kind of time and place where girls not really supposed to express themselves and be seen and not heard and all that. So there's probably a big energy vortex happening within her. And also this is provoking the dad's interest as a linguist. And, so there's a lot happening there too, where there's energy feeding into the situation. One of the things I wrote down is potential for a partial occupation, which means that the young girl may not have always been aware that parts of what were happening were actually her. Now, I doubt she's throwing her voice all over, but gaining enough momentum to have your voice actually be heard auditorily is not that difficult to do. It's a sound vibration, which is, if you can manipulate air vibrations, you can create sound. That's not that difficult for them to do, but things like that, urinating on the floor maybe, or trimming the dog's hair to send it in. Certainly the hunting, like going out and chasing down of things, that sort of thing.
Strangling rabbits.
Like this is all, it's giving a partial occupation, or at least an energy melding where to some degree or another, this entity is able to work with in tandem with the girl's energy, with her own consciousness in order to carry out some activities.
It's not like possession per se. What you're saying, it's like it's a partial melding kind of.
Yeah, I almost never use the word possession because it's usually not the case that something has completely taken over your body from you.
Yeah.
It's usually the case that it's elbowed its way in. So it's like it's an occupation, right? It's never permanent. Nobody's possessing you. But there it has been made some elbow room within the consciousness for the allowing of that energy to have a partial occupation with you, and be working in tandem with whatever's going on with the personality at the
Makes
time.
sense.
So I almost always refer to that as an occupation. In this case, I'd call it a partial occupation. You do see it in some other cases. Like I would describe a lot of what some like dangerous behaviors out of certain kinds of criminal activity, like Ted Bundy, probably partial occupation, right? Half the time, not really, right? And then the other half of the time can't control the energy doing things that normally people would not be doing.
Yeah.
It's a buildup of energy that has to be released. And so it's possible that this case with the little girl also looking like a partial occupation, right? She could have been the one urinating on the floor. She could have been the one snipping the dog hair. that type of stuff. Although she may herself have not, depending on
Been
how
aware of it.
depending on how disassociated the base personality, the human ego personality is from the partial occupation at the time. Sometimes it can look like sleepwalking or other things where people are not really fully aware of what they're doing. It could be that she was never actually aware of the role that she played in some of the physical activity that was happening. And that's sort of what it feels like to me. Avoiding situations like this involves, again, like starving something like that of your energy and attention as best you can. To some degree or another, unless you're really willing to dive into exploring some of these concepts, the best and most useful thing you can be in these situations sometimes is skeptical. So if Jeff had responded to this situation like, whatever, mongoose, probably the
James.
James, thank you. So too many J's. It was probably the cat that knocked that over. Like if we adopt a more skeptical and blow it off mindset about some of this stuff, it never really gains the momentum to become problematic.
Yeah.
Although with the little girl in the household, you were probably to some degree or another still going to get activity. I mean, you remember growing up with me.
Yeah. Nobody
in the house thought anything like that. We were a very scientific family. Nobody believed in stuff like this, right? But if you'll recall, still some odd activity centered around me being there, but
shared nightmares and dreams.
Right. But it never really escalated and got out of control, things like that, because none of the rest of you knew what was happening or believed in any of that at the time. So, having being surrounded by other skeptical people can kind of mitigate the physical reality response to something like that taking place. It's never fails to amaze me the different kinds of forms and the ways in which people interpret things. This Jeff or whatever it was, Jeff, whatever, is, pulling impressions and energy off of the people around it. And so, who knows where the impression of a weasel or a mongoose came from. Maybe just based on whatever it actually is in the realm that it's from, that was the easiest human translation of what it looked like.
Small and mischievous.
Yeah, something small and mischievous is how the energy is coming through. So that's how it got translated to the people around. Like you said, when people in the town would notice it, it would kind of take on different forms or look like something different. So it's, each person is kind of translating that vibe or that energy a little differently. But I would say that, when we're translating a weasel or something like that, we've got something small and mischievous who's got that trickster energy happening, and we're translating it into the visual of some sort of a weasel type creature. Probably why he changed his name to Jeff the Mongoose rather than Jack the Weasel. Jack the Weasel sounds like a little trickster energy that's not up to any good. And so, it's kind of representative of an identity shift, right? You said that changing the name and the title
when things kind of softened up a bit.
Yeah, when he decided he wanted to take a different tactic with the energy pulling from the situation. So that's not surprising to me at all either.
All right.
That's what I got on that one. Like, subscribe, all of that fun-filled stuff. And we will see you guys next time on Unraveling the Unexplained.
Have a good one, folks.
Yep.
James basically...
I'm glad you can read your handwriting.
Yeah, my handwriting is very special.